I love talking about Zelda dungeons, and you guys clearly love listening, since 2 of my most viewed videos to date are about dungeons. I've covered my favorite dungeons and even the worst, but never before have I talked about mini dungeons. For those who aren't familiar, mini dungeons are, well, mini dungeons. They often act as smaller bits of progression, either between dungeons or as side quests. While some mini dungeons can even hang with the full-size temples, others are just terrible. In this video, I will be ranking all 35 mini dungeons in The Legend of Zelda from worst to best. I rank these dungeons based on a combination of puzzles, visuals, importance, and overall enjoyment. One thing that was a little bit confusing when making this list was classifying what actually counts as a mini dungeon. To be safe, I use the Zelda wiki as my source, so if you're wondering where a certain mini dungeon is, it probably just wasn't listed as one on the wiki. Feel free to subscribe for more Zelda content just like this, and with all that out of the way, let's rank all 35 mini dungeons from worst to best. As you might have expected, the bottom few spots of the ranking are going to be taken up by mini dungeons that I don't even think should be on the list. And what a better way to kick it off than with number 35, Hero's Cave from Oracle of Ages. Unlike its Oracle of Seasons counterpart, the Hero's Cave is only accessible through a linked game. I don't think I need to explain why that's holding it back. Number 34, Cave of Shadows. I did not even know this dungeon existed until now. The Cave of Shadows is a bonus dungeon from Twilight Princess HD that can only be played if you own the Wolf Link amiibo. I do not own this amiibo, therefore I have not played through the dungeon. Out of every dungeon on this list, I had by far the most difficult time ranking number 33, Chamber Dungeon. The Chamber Dungeon is a little dungeon maker minigame in the Switch version of Link's Awakening. This minigame allows the player to create their own dungeon layouts with previously cleared floors. Obviously, this being fun or not is entirely up to the player, since you're literally the one making the dungeon. For that reason, it won't place any higher up, though I do think the idea was pretty neat, even if the execution left a lot to be desired. While on the topic of Link's Awakening, we might as well cover number 32, Dream Shrine. This mini dungeon, if you can even call it that, is literally just one room, and the puzzles within said room are just not fun at all. I do think the concept and reward is neat, but I just don't understand how this even qualifies for the ranking. Number 31, Maku Road. Like the Dream Shrine, Maku Road probably shouldn't even be on this list. It basically acts as a pathway to the Maku tree that you have to tackle at the very start of the game. The atmosphere is just really boring, and there's not a whole lot to actually do in this mini dungeon. I do think the Maku Road in the past is better than the present, but both are really lame. Basically just a worse version of the Hero's Cave I'll talk about in just a bit. Number 30, Waterfall Cave from Skyward Sword. Yeah, some of these mini dungeons are really weird. The Waterfall Cave is that cave that Link must explore to find his stolen Loftwing. I don't think this dungeon has a single puzzle in the entire thing. It's literally just a pathway that features a few enemies. Like a lot of the lower placing mini dungeons, the Waterfall Cave is very short, which obviously doesn't help its case. Number 29, Hero's Cave. Like I had just mentioned, the Hero's Cave is practically just a slightly better version of the Maku Road. The two even have a lot in common, like how they're both really boring and short. Though I do like how you get the sword from the Hero's Cave, which definitely boosts its rating by just a little bit. Now we're getting into the mini dungeons that have at least something going for them. Still, not great by any means, but clearly better than the 7 dungeons below them. Number 28, Ambi's Palace. If you know me, you know that I don't like stealth in video games. Specifically in Zelda, and that's basically all Ambi's Palace is. Sneaking around guards to hit the 4 switches isn't terrible by any means, but it's just so boring. Though I really love the music that plays during this mini dungeon, and at least it looks pretty. Number 27, Lost at Sea Station. I'll be honest, the reason this mini dungeon places so low is because it's featured in a DS Zelda game, which, as you might already know, are not my favorite titles in the slightest. Honestly, the Lost at Sea Station is practically just a few extra floors of the Tower of Spirits, since both dungeons revolve around sneaking past phantoms to progress to the next floor. But as you might have guessed, this isn't exactly a positive, since I don't really like the Tower of Spirits at all, and also the Regal Ring is a pretty boring reward. The Moblin Cave is one of the shortest yet memorable mini dungeons on the list. After clearing Tail Cave, Link will be informed that Bow Wow has been stolen by some Moblins, so Link has to rescue him by clearing the Moblin Cave. This dungeon is essentially just a few rooms with some boring enemies, and the rooms don't look very interesting at all. The Moblin mini-boss is kinda cool, but mainly just boring, which is how I feel about this dungeon as a whole. Number 25, Beneath the Well from Majora's Mask. Not to be confused with Bottom of the Well from Ocarina of Time, which will appear much later. Not sure what Nintendo's obsession with making cave-themed mini-dungeons is, but it's honestly super lame. Beneath the Well is a part of the Ikana storyline in Majora's Mask, which is my absolute favorite part of the entire game, though this mini-dungeon is the clear lowlight. Basically, Link has to use the Gibdo mask to solve various riddles, which involves giving Gibdo various items so you can pass through. I find this part of the game can either pass in like 5 minutes or take ages, depending on your previous knowledge, since it can be kinda tedious to track down the required items to progress, though I am a huge fan of the Mirror Shield, which is basically the only reason this dungeon places so high. Number 24, Inside the Great Tree. This is another one of those mini dungeons that makes me wonder how they even made the list at all, though unlike the others, this one is actually kinda fun. Scaling up the inside of this beautiful, huge tree was one of my favorite parts of the Faron Woods revisit. I do think this mini dungeon is greatly carried by its visuals, which as I just mentioned are beautiful, though I do wish there was a bit more to do inside. Still, the Great Tree is just alright. Number 23, Ancient Ruins from Link's Awakening. I feel like the Ancient Ruins could either place much higher or lower depending on the mood. While the dungeon may be very important to the actual story of the game, it's literally just a couple rooms with a mediocre boss fight. Obviously, the lore is the main thing placing this dungeon so high, but I also really like the atmosphere, and the boss is just alright. I think this could have been a solid mini dungeon if it was just a bit longer. Unfortunately, this is what we got, causing the Ancient Ruins to fall to number 23 on my list. I'll be talking about the next two mini dungeons at the same time, since they're extremely similar, those dungeons being the Great Moblin's Keep from the Oracle games. Obviously, the highlight of these two dungeons is the fight against the Great Moblin himself. I've always been a big fan of these bosses, even if they are a bit on the easier side. While the boss fights are literally identical in both games, the actual layout of the keep is quite different. Of the two versions, I think I prefer Seasons from a visual standpoint, though Age's take on the keep is actually relevant to the main story. Again, they're just so similar and on the exact same tier, though if I was forced to pick, I'd probably put Oracle of Seasons on top. I really wanted to put the Ghost Ship higher on this list. Unfortunately, I do think it is a bit underwhelming. Conceptually, the Ghost Ship is one of the coolest mini dungeons in the series, and I really love the mystery of this boat. Like most of the dungeons on the list, this one suffers from being far too short, as it's literally just one room with a few enemies, which can be pretty fun to battle, but it's over in just a few minutes. The Ghost Ship is also required to beat the game, as it houses a piece of the Triforce. If this mini dungeon was any longer, it would be one of my favorites, since it already has a great atmosphere and interesting lore, though again, it is really underwhelming. Number 19, Summit Cave. I kinda forgot this mini dungeon even existed until I made this list, but after thinking about it again, I actually remembered how decent this dungeon is, specifically the boss fight at the end against Volcanic Talus, though this mini dungeon does suffer from being inside another boring cave, which I've already mentioned is a visual design choice that I'm not a big fan of. Overall, a pretty mediocre dungeon with a solid boss and boring atmosphere. Number 18, Fire Mountain from Wind Waker. One of my biggest complaints with Wind Waker has always been its lack of dungeons. There's been a lot of speculation whether both Fire Mountain and Ice Ring Isle were meant to be their own full-size dungeons. Personally, I would have loved to see these mini dungeons get expanded a bit more, but honestly, I'm still pretty happy with what we got. In order to actually enter Fire Mountain, Link must send an ice arrow into the volcano, which will temporarily cool down the mountain, giving Link just a few minutes to grab the treasure. This idea is actually pretty cool, no pun intended, though Fire Mountain really doesn't have a whole lot of actual content inside. It's basically just a kill all the enemies and claim your prize, which is the power bracelet by the way. While I think it's a decent mini dungeon, I do slightly prefer its counterpart, number 17, Ice Ring Isle. I actually think that Ice Ring Isle does everything better than Fire Mountain, like the atmosphere, actual content, and enemy selection. There is a lot more to do in this dungeon compared to its sibling, which obviously makes it a lot more enjoyable to actually explore. I especially like how they added a little bonus room with some extra loot. Actually getting in this dungeon can be pretty tough, as platforming on the slippery ice surface isn't exactly easy, which is probably my only complaint about this mini dungeon, besides it being too short. While I think they're roughly on the same tier, Ice Ring Isle has always been my favorite of Wind Waker's elemental themed mini dungeons. I honestly don't really have too much to say about Pirate's Stronghold from Skyward Sword. As I've said many times on this channel, I am a huge fan of the Sand Ship. The Pirate's Stronghold is basically the build-up for this dungeon, featuring a lot of similar time-related puzzles, like we can find in the actual dungeon. I really enjoy these puzzles, and think they're easily the highlight of this entry. Again, I really don't have much else to say about this dungeon, just a solid mini-dungeon with nothing too exciting going on. Speaking of pirates, number 15, Pirate's Fortress. You might be surprised to see this dungeon ranking so highly, since my hatred for the Great Bay part of Majora's Mask is pretty notorious at this point. Majora's Mask was the most recent Zelda game that I have played, and I was pleasantly surprised to find out that I didn't dislike this dungeon nearly as much as I remembered. Of course, it still had aspects that I'm not a huge fan of, like the stealth and confusing layout, but I didn't exactly have as big of a problem with them this time around, especially since you can use the stone mask to avoid the sneaking parts. While the layout might be confusing, I actually really like this dungeon's atmosphere. It's pretty unique for a Zelda dungeon, and we really haven't seen anything too similar to this since. I'm still quite mixed on the Zora form in the Pirate's Fortress. I've definitely grown to like it more than I used to, but it's still pretty hit or miss for me. Overall, a good mini dungeon, and one that I'm glad I was able to change my opinion of. Number 14, Gerudo Training Grounds. I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but the Gerudo Training Grounds is yet another mini dungeon that I have mixed feelings on. Unlike some of the mini dungeons on this list, the Gerudo Training Grounds is completely optional, and actually pretty easy to miss. This dungeon is a sort of trial gauntlet thing, where the player must clear multiple rooms while searching for keys, which can ultimately unlock a pathway to your reward, the Ice Arrows, which is an item that exists. They really suck. The whole pathway gimmick is honestly such a pain to figure out if you don't know the most ideal path. Like I had mentioned earlier, this dungeon is very hit or miss. This mainly comes from the many different rooms it has to offer, which again can either be fun or not. Another complaint that I have for this dungeon is how it features the same music as Dodongo's Cavern, which is probably my least favorite song in the entire game. Honestly, I could maybe swap the Gerudo Training Grounds for the Pirate's Fortress depending on the mood, though I do think they are very close in terms of quality. As you might have guessed, Majora's Mask has a lot of mini dungeons. This is mainly due to the game's smaller number of actual dungeons and bigger focus on side content. Two of my favorite bits of side content from this game would have to be the spider houses. These mini dungeons require the player to search for numerous Skulltula tokens. Of the two options, the Swamp Spider House is my least favorite, though it's still a really solid mini dungeon. My biggest issue with this dungeon is how it can drag on for a bit too long. Locating the Skulltulas can actually be quite challenging, since all the help you have to locate them is either a sound effect or previous knowledge. I really like this dungeon's visual design, which is very unique. The Mask of Truth is also a pretty neat reward for clearing this dungeon. Overall, the Swamp Spider House is pretty hit or miss. While it has a lot of positives, it can drag on for a bit too long, earning its spot just outside of the top 10. Before we talk about another spider house, let's cover the one and only mini dungeon from the Minish Cap. Number 12, the Royal Crypt. The first thing you'll notice upon entering the Royal Crypt is how it's a direct callback to the first ever Zelda game. Not only is the music playing a nearly identical tune, but the overall layout is very simple, like a lot of the earlier dungeons. While that might sound like a bad thing, I don't necessarily think this dungeon being plain is a problem. It just makes it really easy to cruise through without having to worry about thinking too much. This brings me to basically my only real issue with this dungeon: it's way too short. I get that mini dungeons are supposed to be mini, but I do think the Royal Crypt could have benefited from just a few more added rooms. Okay, back to the spider house discussion. Number 11, Oceanside Spider House. This, to me, has always been the better of the two Majora's Mask spider houses. Something about this dungeon compared to its swamp variant feels so much better to explore through, which could be related to its very interesting and kinda creepy mansion-like visuals or the really fun puzzles, though I'd imagine it's a mix of both. One puzzle in particular that I really enjoyed is the Stall Child password heart piece, found at the very end of the dungeon, where Link must speak to all of the stall children in the spider house to gather cryptic information, which you can use to complete the puzzle at the end of the dungeon and be rewarded with a piece of heart, which is a very fun added bit of content. Like the Swamp Spider House, the Oceanside one is pretty hit or miss when it comes to finding the Skulltulas, though I do think the overall selection is a bit more consistent in the Ocean House. While both are fun mini dungeons, the Oceanside Spider House is pretty clearly the better of the two, for its improved puzzles and unique atmosphere. Kicking off the top 10 is the wrecked ship. If this ranking was based solely off the vibes and atmosphere of each mini dungeon, the wrecked ship would have a serious case for the very top of the list. I really love pirate ships, especially pirate ships in Zelda games, which is something I've mentioned in a lot of my previous videos. The highlight of nearly every single Echoes of Wisdom mini dungeon is the boss, and the wrecked ship is no exception. Bori is a really fun boss fight, and perfectly fitting to the overall theme. Like many of the dungeons on this list, this one suffers from being far too simple and short, but I did really enjoy this dungeon nonetheless. Honestly, the wrecked ship could easily be swapped with number 9, the hidden ruins, depending on the mood. But for now, I placed the ruins on top. While it might not be nearly as cool as a freaking pirate ship, exploring this ancient temple is still really visually appealing. On top of the cool atmosphere, the hidden ruins offers a number of fun electric puzzles for the player to tackle, and of course a very fun boss fight against Smog to top it all off. I don't really have much else to say about this mini dungeon. Again, number 9 and number 10 could totally be swapped around, but as of right now, I placed the ruins on top. Number 8, Savage Labyrinth. The Legend of Zelda series is no stranger to enemy gauntlet type mini dungeons, and the Savage Labyrinth is a prime example. This mini dungeon is found on Outset Island, and consists of 50 floors, each filled with nearly every single enemy you fought throughout the entire game. As you might have guessed, this is both really fun and also challenging, since the enemies get progressively harder the deeper you explore. Recovery hearts are also a rarity, making your time even more stressful. The rewards for clearing this dungeon vary depending on the version of the game. In the classic GameCube version, you will be rewarded with a Triforce chart and Piece of Heart, but on the Wii U, the treasure changes to either a Triforce shard or the Hero's Charm. Either way, some pretty solid items, making clearing this tough labyrinth all worth it. While there isn't a single puzzle in this entire dungeon, the large focus on combat more than makes up for it. Number 7, Bottom of the Well from Ocarina of Time. Bottom of the Well is arguably the most iconic mini dungeon in the entire series. This extremely creepy dungeon has stuck with many people, myself included, for many years. The reason for that being trauma. I mean, come on, who wasn't scared of Dead Hand when they were younger? Hell, I'm still scared of this dude as an adult. The great atmosphere is easily the highlight of this dungeon, though it also has some pretty interesting puzzles to offer, like draining the water or locating invisible walls. This brings me to my big issue with this dungeon. It can be quite annoying and confusing to navigate through. The invisible walls and floors could be a huge pain for many inexperienced players, though it is much better after obtaining the Lens of Truth. Still, Bottom of the Well is one of the more well-loved mini dungeons on the list, making it an easy pick for the top 10. Out of every mini dungeon on this list, the Color Dungeon is the one that I think is the closest to a full-size dungeon. Actually, I thought this was a dungeon before making this list, but it's listed as a mini dungeon on the Zelda wiki, which was my source for the ranking. The Color Dungeon follows a very specific theme, that being, well, color. A lot of the puzzles revolve around color, which is obviously very fitting. Speaking of the puzzles, they're actually really quite fun, which is usually not the case for mini dungeons. Ironically, I think this dungeon's visual design is kinda boring. I wish the walls were a bit more vibrant, since they're just a really plain gray. The Color Dungeon also has a really solid mini boss, making the dungeon as a whole really consistent, though I think the clear highlight is the Great Reward, being a new tunic that will either boost your damage or defense, depending on your choice. Again, I totally thought this was a full-on dungeon. Despite being arguably the biggest dungeon on the list, there are still a few dungeons that I think are better. Number 5, Cave of Ordeals. Just a minute ago, I had talked about the Savage Labyrinth, which is one of my favorite mini dungeons on the list. Well, the Cave of Ordeals is nearly the exact same, only being instead featured in Twilight Princess rather than Wind Waker. Honestly, I think Twilight Princess has far better sword combat compared to Wind Waker, and arguably the best combat in the series, along with the Wild games, which is the largest reason why the Cave of Ordeals places so highly. While the atmosphere and reward aren't super interesting, the fun combat is more than enough to carry this dungeon. Oh, and of course, Naked Fairy is always bonus points. Now we're getting into the really good mini dungeons. Every dungeon in the top 4 is great. While some are better than others, these next few entries are easily my favorites on the list. And what a better way to start us off than with number 4, Eastern Temple from Echoes of Wisdom. Obviously, this entire dungeon is a callback to A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, with this dungeon bearing a striking resemblance to their opening dungeons, the Eastern Palace. Not only is this a super cool and faithful homage to an older dungeon, but the Eastern Temple is a lot of fun to explore. Like the Hidden Ruins, the Eastern Temple features a lot of electric puzzles, which I mentioned I was a huge fan of. This dungeon also features Smog as the final boss, which again is really fun. Not only is this my favorite mini dungeon in Echoes of Wisdom, it's my favorite side quest in the entire game as well, making the Eastern Temple an easy choice for the top 4. A while back, I had mentioned how Ocarina of Time's Bottom of the Well was arguably the most iconic mini dungeon in the entire series. Well, the reason there's even a debate to be made is because number 3, Ice Cavern, exists. This mini dungeon is so unbelievably close to being perfect. I think its atmosphere is extremely fitting and does a great job at capturing the cold feel of an icy cave. From the actual visuals to chilling music, all of it is so well done. I also really like this dungeon's puzzles, which mainly involve using blue fire to melt various obstacles. While this could get kind of annoying since it involves a bit of backtracking, I personally don't have an issue with it at all. I feel like the room most people would hate from this dungeon is the sliding puzzle near the end, though I've always been a huge fan of these kinds of puzzles, and this instance is no exception. Despite all the praise I'm giving this dungeon, there is one thing greatly holding it back. The fact that Nintendo chose a freaking singular White Wolfos as the final boss is so dumb. These dudes can literally be defeated in one hit, and it's not like we can't have cool bosses in mini dungeons. I mean, look at Bottom of the Well, that dungeon has a great boss. Though I won't lie, the actual boss room is one of my favorite Zelda locations of all time. I would love to hang out in there. The Ice Cavern has always been my favorite mini dungeon in Ocarina of Time, and a nearly perfect mini dungeon in general. This is a part of the game that I always look forward to replaying, but as good as it is, there are still too many dungeons that I think are better. Number 2, Connalet Castle from Link's Awakening. This is probably my hottest take on the entire list. I have absolutely no clue why, but Connalet Castle has always been one of my favorite mini dungeons in the entire series. I mean, it's a great dungeon with a great atmosphere, enemy selection, and puzzles, but I don't know why I like it this much. Anyway, Connalet Castle once belonged to this guy named Richard, but Richard lost ownership of this castle after he got kicked out. To progress in the main story, Richard sends Link back to his old place to recover his golden leaves. To actually enter the castle, Link has to trade items with a monkey, who will make him a bridge. Already off to a great start since monkeys are freaking awesome. The leaves can be found in some pretty interesting locations, which require the player to either kill enemies or solve puzzles. As I had mentioned earlier, the enemy selection in this dungeon is really quite solid, and some are even pretty tough to kill. Visually, this dungeon is absolutely stunning, and is made 1,000 times prettier with a beautiful Switch remake, which makes this location feel so much more cozy. I always have a blast exploring through Connalet Castle. Not only is it my favorite mini dungeon in the game, but I could even argue that it's my favorite part of the game in general. Again, I'm not quite sure what draws me to this dungeon so much, but I do know that I really like it, making Connalet Castle nearly my favorite mini dungeon in the entire franchise, being topped by only one. Number 1, Ancient Castle of Ikana. I mean, I'm sure we all saw this one coming. Ikana Castle is a perfect mini dungeon. There is genuinely not a single thing that I would change about this dungeon. First, let's start with the build-up, which is actually the previously mentioned Beneath the Well. As I had mentioned earlier, this mini dungeon isn't all that great, but the fact that it leads directly into Ikana Castle is totally a bonus. The actual puzzles require Link to use most of his transformation mask to either soar through the air or carry powder kegs, which is later used to blast a hole in the roof, allowing light to leak through. All of the puzzles in this dungeon are a lot of fun, and there's even a mini boss in this mini dungeon. And of course, the highlight of this dungeon is the battle against the ancient king of Ikana himself, Egos to Ikana, and his lackeys. This boss fight is so much fun. It's really unique and hardly feels like a mini boss at all. After defeating the undead warriors, Link will be taught the Elegy of Emptiness, which sets up one of the greatest dungeons in the entire franchise, Stone Tower Temple. Not only is this mini dungeon a lot of fun to actually explore, but the lore and atmosphere surrounding it is equally as interesting. And of course, who could forget that bangin' music? The Ancient Castle of Ikana is everything that a mini dungeon should be. It's short enough while still having a lot of content. The content is actually a lot of fun, the location is interesting, and it perfectly sets up the next chunk of the story. I absolutely adore the Ikana Canyon story arc in Majora's Mask. It's always been been my absolute favorite part of the entire game, and this great mini dungeon is one of the leading reasons why, making Ikana Castle not only a perfect mini dungeon, but my absolute favorite in The Legend of Zelda. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe for more Zelda content just like this. I hope you could agree with my list. If not, feel free to comment your favorite and least favorite mini dungeons down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you all for the continued support over the course of my channel. We are almost at 20,000 subscribers, which is a milestone I never thought I'd hit. So thank you all for making this dream possible. It means the world to me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.